We are here to talk about Suitable Flesh. It's a film that takes us back to the Miskatonic Hospital. Why are we back, and what new horrors are recurring?
Why are we back? Well, because, I think the world needs a little Lovecraft right now. We need a nice big cosmic hug from one of the masters of horror. And, I think it's time for that kind of, kind of more supernatural, mystical film genre to kind of rear its ugly head a little bit, not just in big movies that, because I know we've been waiting for Guillermo's version of Lovecraft, and hopefully that happens someday. But one of the things that I loved about a lot of the Lovecraft films from back in the day when I was growing up was that they weren't these big cosmic epics that when I read Lovecraft, that's kind of what I envisioned. I love the fact that Lovecraft could also dive into smaller, more intimate stories, but also within a bigger tapestry. We're in a world now in entertainment and in storytelling where everyone wants big extended universes. And we all tend to forget that, writers like Stephen King and especially Lovecraft were the OGs of that. They were doing that back in the day for so long. And, when I thought about doing this film, I was like, well, one of the things that I love about those writers is the fact that you can read all of these branching stories and feel like they are in the same world. Like we live in a world where there are so many stories being told, but they're all within one multiverse, so to speak. Well, I wanted to kind of bring back a Miskatonic verse. I wanted to, at least make the audience feel like this wasn't a separate reinvention of things like Miskatonic, like the Necronomicon, like certain characters. I wanted them to feel like we took the time to respect the storytellers from the past, like Lovecraft, like Stuart Gordon, like Dennis Paoli and Brian Usna, and even Barbara, and be able to connect them, but in ways that you don't have to feel like you just walked into the new Ant-Man and you having not seen any of the previous movies going, I am totally lost here. What universe are we in? No, you can enjoy the film on its own, but the awesome, cool film nerd that's next to you who's watching it going like, like I'm getting all the little Easter eggs, they can enjoy it on a completely different level. And then you can have coffee or a beer afterwards and talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. And the film is dedicated to the late Stuart Gordon. What does his body of work mean to you?
Stuart to me was one of those original, at least for me, and like in my burgeoning horror passion and obsession, he was one of the first filmmakers that I remember seeing that provoked me. That he was one of those original provocateurs, at least of the films that I was watching at the time. I had never seen a film like Reanimator. I didn't get to see it in theaters, but I saw it on a video box, and it was right next to all the other slasher movies and, monster movies. And I didn't quite know how to classify it. So of course I brought it home, or at least my mom brought it home because she's a big horror fan, and now I am because of her. So through osmosis, my mom, kind of got me into this world, and I had never been so affected by a movie in so many different ways. I couldn't believe that I could laugh in a movie like this. I didn't know that I could have certain feelings while watching a movie like this, but also be thoroughly entertained and terrified. And that to me was that was my introduction to Stuart, and that kind of sensibility that he brought to all of his films was something that I've enjoyed, all the way until he passed on, even down to the stage plays that he would do, like Evermore or like Reanimator the musical. He was one of those filmmakers that knew how to push buttons, but do it in a way that didn't feel like he was excluding the audience or alienating the audience. He was bringing you in and then twisting the screws, whether it was with, extreme violence at certain times, but punctuated in certain moments that felt right. whether it was having a kind of a gallows sense of humor, whether it was exploring sexuality in ways that I don't think, especially at the time when Reanimator and From Beyond came out, sex was used a lot of times as a cautionary tale in slasher films. And here he was embracing that and kind of bringing it into a world like Lovecraft that I don't think anyone had seen before. And these movies were incredibly sexy. And I felt like in the last couple of years, again, just from my own opinion, I hadn't seen that in a lot of movies, in a lot of cinema, especially in genre. And I was like, once the script kind of came to me and we kind of figured out the right formula for it, so to speak, it felt like it was time to, bring the sexy back in a way, but do it in a way that felt both, propelled by plot and character. I didn't want to just, do what a lot of films in the 80s and 90s did, was like, all right, it's about 45 minutes in, sex scene. Well, they just met. It doesn't matter. They Michael Biehn and Patsy Kensit got to get into bed together. Go, and it felt very superfluous and very empty. Whereas here, every time someone gets amorous with someone else, there is a plot drive to it, but there's also a character drive to it, and that essentially was what I kind of gravitated towards when it came to absorbing what Stuart was trying to do with a lot of his films. And, I wanted to be able to find all of those little tonal templates and be able to infuse that into the story.
Yeah, because like I say, there has been this whole movement about, let's keep the sex out of the TV shows and films. And, this film does get very steamy. It's a very sensual film in a way. I think the sex it's more sort of sensual than you were saying than the gratuitous nudity that we are perhaps more familiar with from horror slashes in particular. Why do you? I mean, I guess you've already sort of answered it to a degree, but why do you think that sex is a valid method of storytelling?
Well, it is a true connector between people. Biologically, emotionally. Sex is something that has always been in our, culture in a way, for good or for bad, as a way to connect people, or as a way to pull people away. And, over the years, I feel like, there's been a very puritanical sense of sexuality in our culture, in our media. And it's something that has always been, bothersome to me, because I think, sex is a beautiful thing. It can also be a very dangerous thing. That's kind of one of the interesting things about sex, is that from any particular purview, you can see and even utilize sexuality and sexual identity and, sexual attraction and, certain fetishes that people have, as ways to both, arouse, but also indict. It's such a complex concept. And that was something that, with this story in particular, because it's about identity and because it's about obsession, and I love the idea that you have, this entity that is roaming through this storyline that is, in most cases in these kind of stories, it would be for a greater gain, right? It would be for world domination or, power or money or whatever. And, not to give too much away, but, this entity, so to speak, has been through, so many bodies over so many years, and he's, or she, or it, that's the beauty of it, we don't know, is kind of just bored, and they find, it reminds me a lot of what David Cronenberg was exploring with Crash, how that to me is one of the true great sci-fi films, because sci-fi films are films about the fear of the future, or the caution of the future, and how are we dealing with technology, and it's not just about aliens and and all that stuff. There's other elements of sci-fi that make it both intriguing and entertaining, but also a little scary. And what Cronenberg was doing with Crash was saying, what if we got bored with traditional sex? Where do we go from there? We go to having sex with cars and having sex with other orifices. There's something really alluring about that movie, which I love, but also a little bit disconcerting, and that's kind of where we wanted to approach sex in this movie, is that, the sex is being used as a way to connect, but also as a way to exploit, and also as a way to, to overpower people. And that was just something that I felt like if we were going to do it, and I'm glad you brought the word sensual up, because that was the approach that we wanted to take with this. I didn't want to be, Larry Clark and kids. And I love, what Larry Clark did with that movie, but there's a very graphic frankness to it. Whereas I wanted to look at a lot of the films, like film noir, so to speak, or even a lot of films like Lawrence Kasdan's Body Heat. I personally, I'm a big fan of giving the audience just enough without being gratuitous. Look at Polanski's Chinatown. One of the sexiest shots in movies that I feel is the shot of Faye Dunaway after they had sex, and the camera is just above her nipple. And that to me is so much sexier than just being like, here it is, folks. There is something about, titillation, no pun, that I feel is a lot more alluring, because no matter what, as we both know, especially in horror, the theater of the mind is one of the greatest weapons that a filmmaker can use, because once you start throwing all the blood in the guts or all the boobs and the butts, onto screen, there's little left to the imagination. And that's kind of what we wanted to do, not just with the violence, but also with the more sensual scenes. We wanted to make it sexy without being graphic, because I would much rather have someone go like, God, I wish I saw more, instead of, oh, guys, I've seen everything now, no thanks.
It's based on Lovecraft's The Thing on the Doorstep, which I reread after watching the film. And it kind of struck me as being very ahead of its time in respects to gender fluidity. It's obviously it's about this entity that possesses person to person, and there's very much a drive of the female character sort of wanting to be a man and going to great lengths to achieve that. And therefore, it kind of makes sense that in modern times, we are again exploring a story of gender fluidity. Because you've got, but I mean, it switched, like it's two male protagonists in the original story, and you've got two female friends in Heather Graham and Barbara Crampton talking here. I mean, that must have been a lot of like fun, I guess, for the actors, because they themselves are being different characters and different genders and different entities all at any given time.
Yeah, that honestly, that was one of the things that was the most fun while being on set. It was also incredibly difficult because, we had to be very careful with all of the little details that we had established with amongst the other actors. There were little traits, whether it was with the hand, whether it was with, how they smoked a cigarette, even just the way that they inflected certain words. There had to be, because there was this base of a character, which was the entity that was traversing between these vessels, these flesh vessels, if you will, or these, suits. So that was something that I really enjoyed, when you have a cast like with Heather and Barbara and Judah and Bruce, to be able to kind of work with them and find these little things that we can kind of share together as a group, because we ultimately were all this entity at one point, maybe them, maybe not me, but I was kind of living life vicariously through them. But that was the other thing too that I felt was really important with this, was that, you look at a lot of the usual, like there's a lot of body swap movies out there, it's practically become its own subgenre. And that was one of the things that I was a little cautious about at first when I first read the script, because it felt like, with two men in this traditional, in the traditional adaptation that Dennis had done, it felt like something that we had seen before. That was one thing that kind of turned me off a little bit on it, no offense to the script, but it was just like the world around us has shown us this story before. But also it just felt like, especially in today's purview, two men as the protagonist. I felt like if this was a movie in the 90s starring Michael Douglas as one of the characters, we'd probably be able to, justify it a little bit more. But I felt like there was something a little more dangerous and provocative if we had not just flipped it because someone at a studio said, fellas, guess what? It's Lethal Weapon with chicks. That has become, unfortunately, a bit of a trend. We wanted to do it, but to do it in a way that was responsible and thematic and felt right, So like my writing partner is a woman. And when we first came up with the idea and we presented that to Barbara and to Dennis, I was honestly expecting them to say like, no, thanks guys, we'll find someone else. But they were really intrigued. And then when the first draft that Dennis came back with was so nuanced in a way that he didn't just change Daniel to Daniela, and Edward to Elizabeth, on good old Final Cut, Final Draft. He really dug deeper into what it is like, not just to be, a woman in this situation, but also an older woman. One of the things that I know bother a lot of people about From Beyond is the fact that Catherine McMasters is so young to be a doctor, and like I didn't want to fall into that trap again. Not to say that there's not many intelligent Doogie Howser-esque female doctors out there in their 20s, but there was something really exciting about the fact that it was older women who have lived more of a life, who can say that they've, been, enough in complacency, whether it's a successful job, whether it's a successful family, to have the same kind of desires or have the same kind of very human responses to things like, a younger male, or things, what's the grass greener like, on the other side. That was much more exciting to me, and that was something that I felt like, now that's an interesting thing that I know Stuart would probably want to delve into more than just go get me the hottest, freshest young face. And then when you have actors like Barbara and Heather, kind of together in this movie, there was just something so exciting about that. And that was something that I wanted to explore. And boy, goddamn, did we explore it.
And then into this sort of like these titans of acting in Heather and Barbara and Bruce, you bring in Judah Lewis, who is still relatively young in his career. At what point did you realize that he had what he took to not only hold his own against these two fantastic actresses, but also to convey the complexity of this character, because he's sinister and seductive all at once, and you completely kind of understand why character decisions are made based on his performance alone?
Well, thank you, because I'm glad that you kind of picked up on Judah and the whole Asa of it all, because that was our quote unquote Asa in the hole for this movie. I just came up with that. I swear that I'm writing that one down. But Asa Waite, that character, especially the way that we flipped it around a little, was going to be so integral to the kind of story and also character structure, in the integrity of that story, all hinged on him, or it, if you will. And we needed someone that could feel comfortable, in their own flesh, so to speak. But we also need someone who was versatile enough to be able to jump between 4 or 5 different characters at the same time. And, this sounds like such a cliche, but we looked at so many tapes and so many auditions and talked to so many people. And, a lot of them were a little scared of the project, because it was very provocative and very raw. And these days, there's not a lot of actors out there. Funny enough, not a lot of male actors out there who were willing to take the leap with us, especially in the sexuality side. And thankfully, my good friend Samara Weaving, who I worked with on Mayhem, had worked with Judah on The Babysitter. And I met him years ago at the Vista when they were doing the premiere. And he was such a cute little kid. But there was something about him in that movie that I immediately was like, oh God, I would love to work with him someday. But truth be told, I kind of forgot about it. And then someone had mentioned his name when we were kind of still racking our brain, because at this point we had Heather, we had Barbara, and he was the final kind of linchpin, no pun again, into making sure that we had something that felt like a good Lovecraft triangle. I'm getting there. I'm working on it. But it took and then it was merely just a bunch of different calls to get into a Zoom room with him. And I swear to God, it was within 5 minutes I knew that was our Asa Waite. And not only that, but that this was someone who was so truly talented and so versatile that I would hope to work with him over and over again. And he really did. He took that character to the next level. He didn't just, he wasn't just good enough for government work. he like excelled that character to the point where there were things that he was doing that all the other actors who had to also embody this entity picked up on as well, just from casual Zoom meetings or just from getting together on a Friday night before we shot. And you could just tell that everyone was absorbing things that he was doing. And it wasn't like he was being pretentious about it. It was just being him. But the way he talked about it, Judah really, I loved working with him, and we were so lucky to get him. And, without him, I don't know how we would have been able to do everything that we wanted to do as well as we did.
And in addition to Barbara, there's a lot of other sort of almost Easter egg people in the cast who were collaborators with Stuart Gordon. I'm guessing that was a really easy phone call for a lot of them.
To be honest, a lot of them came to us. That was one of the things that once we got going, and Barbara being the grandmother. No, I shouldn't say grandmother. That's not fair to her. The queen of horror. But she is very much like a matriarch to so many people in this genre that everybody loves her and everybody wants to work with her. That was the main reason why I wanted to work with her, is because, she's got such a wonderful reputation as someone who's not just a total pro and so talented, but she truly loves this genre. She protects it in a way. And this was something that was very, very important to her and very special to her. And I felt like I had a very big responsibility in that. And once I had said that I wanted to make this something of a love letter to Stuart, still make it my own, but be part of that Miskatonic universe, so that if you've seen Reanimator and From Beyond, there's, tendrils, if you will, or tentacles of, certain things and elements and places and people that connect it all together. And it felt like it was the right situation to be able to tip our hat to Stuart and, his company by either bringing in cast members or even characters from his other films, sorry, in ways that, would, again, not distract from the story, but enrich it and allow, like, those little Easter eggs are the sort of Easter eggs that I would, if I was just watching this, go, all right, he gets me, or she gets me. Like we're speaking the same language. So when you have people like, Graham Skipper, who had worked with Stuart many times before, Chris McKenna from King of the Ants, which is arguably like my top 3 Stuart Gordon. I think that movie is completely underrated and it needs to be rediscovered, if you will. Bringing them in was as easy as Graham calling me and saying, can I be in the movie? I'll fly myself down. And then Chris hearing from Graham and going, because Chris and Graham worked together on Reanimator the musical, Chris calling Graham saying, can you give me Joe Lynch's number? And he came down as well, just literally for a day. But it's, again, these things were so important to me, because for, not just Lovecraft fans, but for Stuart fans, we loved what he did. And a lot of the love that came from, outside people, were purely because they wanted to give back. They loved Stuart so much that they were willing to come out to Mississippi in the swampy summer and spend a little time with us, just because they thought he was, really special.
Yeah, and I think that love does come across on screen. And the film's already, I think it's already been acquired by Shudder. We're talking ahead of TriBeCa. There's been Fantasia has recently been announced. Are there any plans to continue the festival trend? Maybe
absolutely. There's I honestly, the response so far has been really encouraging, because I think this is not just a film for horror fans, but it's just or just Lovecraft and Stuart fans, but just fans of these types of films in general. And that's one of the things that I love about film festivals, is that you can discover such great new voices and maybe some old voices at these places, and see such a wide array of different films. And as of right now, there's none that we can kind of mention just yet, but there's enough interest in the film all the way up to its release later this year, to be able to kind of show it around the world. And I'm so excited to get it out there, because this was totally, I know that the cliche labor of love, because it was a labor, but it was done purely out of the love of Lovecraft and Stuart and, kind of provocative cinema, but done in a way that I hope audiences never feels exploitative. Will it anger some people? Sure. Will it provoke a response? I goddamn hope so, because there's nothing better than to watch a movie and go, I need to talk to someone about this immediately, whether it's on Twitter or at the pub afterwards. I love those type of movies. So that was one thing that we hopefully, achieved with this. And, at the same time, hopefully make people enjoy what it's like to watch some sexy cinema again.
Yeah, I mean, I personally can't wait to hopefully see it in a crowded festival audience, because I think it's going to play so well in that sort of crowd.
Me too. I agree.
I wish you the best of luck with TriBeCa and Fantasia, and maybe I'll see you on the circuit.
Yeah, maybe you will. Wink, wink, wink.